Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this live webinar titled Gateway, Artemis, and NASA's Return to the Moon. So today's panelist is Dr. Jeffrey D. Smith from the NASA Kennedy Space Center, and I am Marco Ponzetti, and I will be your moderator for today. So here's a quick run through of the webinar and what it is going to be like. So this is our welcome and introduction. Then we will obviously add the webinar. And then we will have a question and answer session, and hopefully we will achieve all of the objectives, of the learning objectives that we have. So here's, since not everybody knows about ECTS and the TMS, and this is a joint, the first ever joint webinar between these two societies. Here's what the societies are. So the ECTS is actually the most important European scientific society in the field of bone and mineral research. And its aim is advancing research in the bone field to eventually benefit patients. And if you want to check it out, here's the website, and here's a QR code to access it. So I'll give you a moment to scan it if you're on your phone right now. And on the other side, we have the TMS, which is a much smaller society. It's not even a society, really. It's very, but we're very committed. We're a group of researchers, professors, and students from different disciplines, including biotechnology, biochemistry, and all physics, chemistry. We're based in the University of L'Aquila in Italy, where I'm broadcasting from. And our aim is to disseminate good science and help younger people with learning scientific English. And I would tell you to go and visit the website, but it is actually down right now because of all days, they chose to take it down today. But anyway, as soon as it comes up, just note down the website and come check it out. So before we go any further, here's a few webinar housekeeping rules. As you have noticed, all attendees are muted, so we cannot hear you. Please don't ask questions with your voice because we cannot hear you. You can ask questions, however, via the questions control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen if you're watching this on your computer. And please do not wait for the last minute to ask questions because otherwise we'll be overwhelmed with questions and we will be forced to make some choices about them. So please don't wait for the last minute, ask questions as soon as they come. Just so you know, the session is being recorded and it will be made freely available in a few weeks' time. A few upcoming activities, especially the webinars. There is actually a webinar later today at 4 Central Europe time by Dennis Disher, and it's called Mechanical Construction of ECM Cell Interaction. Please don't miss it. It's a great webinar, and you really don't want to miss it. We have another one on the 17th of December, which is called Fundamental and Clinical Aspects of Bone and Cancer by Gabri van der Pluijm and Payman Haji. That's another really good one. And if you're interested in the bone field, I know not everybody here is a bone scientist, but you want to sign up for the ECTS Congress, which will take place in Marseille from the 16th to the 19th of May 2020. Marseille in France, obviously. The abstract submission is now open, and it will be open until the 13th of January 2020. And like the questions, don't wait for the last minute to submit your abstract, because otherwise the system will be overloaded. And so if you have your abstract ready, just submit it. There's nothing wrong with that. So you can join the conversation on our social media channels. You can see the ECTS channels here, ECTS SOC, Science Academy, that's the Twitter. And you also have the TMS channels, Thursday morning 8. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow the TMS on Instagram. Currently, ECTS does not have an Instagram page, but I think that's in the pipeline. So please join the conversation, especially using the hashtag ECTS-TMS. So without further ado, let me just introduce the panelist, Dr. Jeffrey D. Smith. So Jeff began his NASA career in 1997 as a life scientist and computer engineer at NASA Ames Research Center in California. And there he focused on cell science research, artificial gravity technology, and flight hardware development for space biology. Then from there, he moved to a variety of leadership and management positions in NASA, of course, until in 2016, Jeff transferred to the Kennedy Space Center, where he is broadcasting from today, to serve as a division chief for science and technology project, which focuses on ground and launch technologies as well as robotics and spaceflight projects supporting NASA's exploration goals, which will be a big part of today's talk. So Dr. Smith earned his PhD in Aerospace Engineering Sciences from the University of Colorado. And if one bachelor wasn't enough, he actually has two. He has one in physics and one in biology from Miami University, Ohio. He's also, not only is he a NASA employee, he's a really exceptional one, because he received the Exceptional Service Medal and Outstanding Leadership Medal, which are two of the agency's most distinguished honor awards. So Jeff, thank you so much for being here today, and the virtual floor is yours. I will just...
Thank you very much, Margot. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Let's see if I can get my slideshow running here. Now you'll have to just tell me if you can see. I think Marco, if you can let me know if you're able. Okay, so everything's there. Great.
Perfect. Yes.
So again, thank you very much. This talk today is about Gateway, Artemis, and NASA's return to the moon. Gateway and Artemis are the names of two NASA programs that we have ongoing right now. They're new, and they are going to be the parts of the agency's mission to get boots on the moon, to return to the surface of the moon by 2024. So Marco mentioned that I have a science background and a technology background. So this presentation today is not a serious science talk or a serious technology talk. It's a lot more about our programs and projects and what we're doing at NASA to get back to the moon, and why it's a good idea to do it now and why we can do it. But don't hold back your science and technology questions for NASA. I hope that I can answer those as well as we go here. Certainly, let me get a little bit perspective for you. I'm from the NASA Kennedy Space Center now, as Marco mentioned. And at Kennedy Space Center, if you don't know too much about it, let me give you a little bit of an overview. A lot of people know that Kennedy Space Center is where we launched the rockets, where every human spaceflight mission from NASA that has launched from the United States has launched from Kennedy Space Center. And here's a great image of the space shuttle. The last space shuttle mission flew in 2011, so not even 10 years ago. The space shuttle was retired when the space station was completed. Its assembly was completed, and so now the space shuttle is retired, and we're looking ahead to the next launch capabilities at NASA. There's a web link in the bottom left corner. These images are screen captures from our Kennedy Space Center Go video, which is on YouTube, and you can watch it if you'd like. At Kennedy Space Center, we have a lot of the infrastructure and the systems for processing launch vehicles and getting them to the launch pad and getting them launched on time. This pictured here is the launch support tower for the Space Launch System, the new rocket that's being developed now and that will launch. And you can see kind of in the center left, there's a platform that the rocket will stand on, and you can see the cutouts for the rocket engines to blast through the stand down to the ground when it launches at the launch pad. And here it is in its assembly area, kind of parked off to the side of the vehicle assembly building, which is this picture. The vehicle assembly building is probably our largest structure. It's one of the largest buildings in the world by volume. It's 450 feet tall. It has about 50 stories. I've been lucky enough to get to go to the roof one day, and I didn't want to get too close to the edge because you're really far up there. It's a very big building. And this building is where all of the Apollo rockets were assembled and rolled out to the pad. This is where the space shuttle was assembled for over 100 flights, about 130 flights. And this is where the Orion and the Space Launch System will be assembled and rolled to the pad. Down in the lower right, the small, what looks like a small building, but is still a 5-story building, is the Launch Control Center, and it has the viewing ports out to the launch pad, which are off to the right. Here's an image that I like of our crawlers. These are the huge NASA crawlers, big diesel tractors that hold the rockets and the launch pads on top of them. That number 1 you see in the top is the launch pad that the crawler is holding on top of it. This is only just the corner of the crawler. There's the whole rest of it is off to the left. But these things are capable of carrying the entire rocket, the launch pad, and the launch structure all the way out to the pad. It goes about 1 mile an hour when it's rolling the rocket out, and it takes about a day to get there. And of course, the launch is very exciting. And NASA Kennedy Space Center launches more than just the space shuttles and the Apollos. We launch a number of unmanned rockets every year. And here is a Delta IV rocket launching on the launch pad. It'll be carrying a robotic science mission, either a mission to deep space or to Mars, or a mission that's carrying a satellite into orbit that would look back at the Earth for Earth sciences or other purposes. We have the SpaceX launches here and other launches of this nature. This is a SpaceX Falcon 9 launch recently. On the top is the Dragon capsule. This particular launch is to put cargo, not crew, but the cargo for the International Space Station up there to the space station. So we have several launches a year from SpaceX and another company called Northrop Grumman that launches actually from Wallops Space Flight Center in Virginia that ferry cargo to and from the space station, which is very active right now. And pretty soon, there will be crew launches on similar sized rockets to the International Space Stations. That's slated for next year. Another big area of work that we do at Kennedy Space Center is all the processing and putting the rockets together and putting the payloads in the rockets and putting the different kinds of systems together. Here's a picture of one of our high bays with everybody working to encapsulate one of the science satellites into the payload fairing that you see split in half that they'll put together. That's an Atlas payload fairing. This will be a robotic mission, probably to deep space or to orbit somewhere to do a science mission. But other areas, if for those who are biology or science people, there's a whole lot of processing to get the small payloads and the science payloads on board for the space station experiments or for other deep space missions. And then SLS, Space Launch System. This is a graphic of what the new rocket will look like. It'll be the most powerful rocket ever built. It takes some heritage from the space shuttle. You can see what may be familiar boosters on the strap to the side, and the center is a very large hydrogen and oxygen liquid fuel tank, and then on the top you have the space capsule and the second stage, and the very top is a launch abort system, a rocket that would pull the crew capsule away from the larger rocket if something were to happen during the launch and take them to safety. Where are we at Kennedy Space Center? Here's a graphic of the United States with all of the 10 NASA centers around the United States pictured. Kennedy Space Center is down here in Florida in the lower right on what we call the Space Coast. If you do a little blow up, Kennedy Space Center is located kind of on an island out. It's Merritt Island. It's not a big island, but it's an area that is surrounded by water and estuary and Banana River. And we have a number of launch pads, many of them over on the right. They're all kind of off to the ocean side, launching historic sites, or they're the new sites in the upper right. Those are the sites where the big launches will occur and where the shuttle occurred before. We also have a great visitor center. If you ever have a chance to come out this way, I encourage you to come to our visitor center. We have a great history and today areas. We have an actual space shuttle on display there. The Space Shuttle Endeavour is there, and a great bus tour that'll take you all around the center. So before I get too far into this, I'd like to do a poll. If you would set up the poll, Marco, the first poll. Oh, do I have to close something? Hopefully this is working.
Yes, we received the answer, 7% both.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll continue on. Let me know if that I'm continuing. So thank you very much for taking the poll. I'm curious to know how, if people are aware of NASA's plans to return to the moon here. All right, next slide, if I can. There we go. Okay, so let's look back a little bit before we talk about going forward to the moon. You know, it really wasn't long ago before when canals were thought to be on Mars, and they were thought to be signs of alien life. This was through the 1920s, and as far as the 40s and 50s, people actually thought there could still be life there. And we know now that not to be true, but that wasn't too long ago. Not too long ago, much more recently, the moon was an enigma. The age and origin were purely speculation in the 1960s until we actually landed on the moon. And it was thought to be an extremely dry place until even more recently, until 1998, when the Lunar Prospector mission and other missions confirmed that there's a lot of water in ice-type form around the poles of the moon, shown there on the right. And it was not too long ago that it was thought that microgravity, just the fact that you could be in microgravity was questionable. It was thought that a man could stop breathing. It wouldn't be possible to breathe, or the heart might stop beating in microgravity. And that was thought until the years of Sputnik in 1957, when the dog Laika was launched, and then of course when Yuri Gagarin launched, and the first human survived spaceflight. So human spaceflight is hard, and it's rare and unforgiving, and it's very recent as far as history goes. It's only been 58 years since the first human orbited the Earth. That was Yuri Gagarin in 57. 438 days is the longest stay ever made in space, the longest continuous stay made by Valery Polyakov from 1994 to 1995. That's the longest anyone's ever actually been there. 249,205 miles, that might sound like a long distance, but that astrologically, that's very short distance. It's the farthest humans have ever traveled from Earth, and that was Apollo 13, pictured there after the crew had left this capsule and the return to Earth, and they noted they could see the panels that had blown away from the explosion. And the Apollo 13 went further than any other Apollo because it had to shoot past the moon to come straight back to Earth, and that put them farther away than anyone has ever gone. But from a celestial point of view, 250,000 miles and the distance to the moon is a very short distance. We haven't really gone that far. 12.5 days, that's the longest duration beyond low Earth orbit for any human to have ever gone. That's Apollo 17 in 1972. And it's fitting that we'll talk about this and start with Apollo today, because it's been 50 years to the day since the launch of the Apollo 12, the second human mission to the surface of the moon. So that's a very interesting coincidence, and I'm really, really proud that we've gone 50 years and we're ready to go back again here. 560, that's the total number of people from all nations ever to travel into orbit. That's a very small number if you think about other things that have happened. You know, that many people a year climb Mount Everest, for comparison. Every year, 560 people or 500 people climb Mount Everest. 560 people is the total that have ever been into space from Yuri Gagarin to the present. And then on the right, 13 is the largest number of people that have been in space at one time. That's happened a couple of times. When a space shuttle visited the space station, you had 13 total people on board. So I just want to give you some perspective. Human spaceflight is an exceptionally rare thing. There really isn't a lot of opportunity for us to study this rare occasion. And every moment gives us an opportunity for learning, for discovery, and for shattering the dogmas of a world before we touch the stars. Though it wasn't long ago, we thought things that just today we can't believe. People thought about that. They really believed that we couldn't go to space. Now we can, and we know a lot, but we're going to keep learning a lot with every single mission because it is such a rare and difficult thing to do. Now, in the 1960s, a bold vision. We had a very bold vision here with President Kennedy, who announced that we were going to go to the moon. That got us there. In 1969, not even a decade after the announcement was made public, when Neil Armstrong famously said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." But things were very different in the 1960s, not like today. We had the space race going on, very, very intense space race, starting with the Russians' robotic landers to the moon, the Lunar missions, then Yuri Gagarin, then John Glenn in 1962, the Russians with the first woman in space, the Russians with the first spacewalks, Alexei Leonov. The Russians basically were winning everything in the space race at that point. There was also the containment of communism at this time. The United States had just come from the Korean War that ended in 1953. We had a Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba in the early 1960s, the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, where the Russians and the Cubans were putting nuclear warheads in Cuba close to the United States. And combat began in our Vietnam War in 1965. All of these things coming together to really create a Cold War, which wasn't very cold at this point, between the United States and the Soviet Union. Also in the 1960s, the Apollo program budget grew to as high as 4.4% of the entire federal budget. The graphic on the right shows our budget profile for NASA from the 1960s through to the 1980s, and it really spiked up there in 1966 in a huge way, and it's leveled off ever since the 1980s. And if you saw this graph go all the way out to today, it would basically level off at about the 0.5% level and just stay there. So back then we had a huge budget, and I always wondered, what are we doing with all that money in 1966? We didn't land on the moon until 1969. I found a picture from a press release in 1966. NASA builds a moon port. The first unmanned flight of the Saturn V in 1967 occurred. So here's an image of the Apollo being rolled out on the crawler to the launch pad with the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, in the background. That's what we were doing that spent so much money, US money, in the late 1960s, is building that entire infrastructure that we continue to use today. Finally, the loss of President Kennedy galvanized American commitment to achieving this audacious vision. With the loss of President Kennedy, who was very involved and very interested in the space program, the United States was really put on a path to do everything we could to achieve that vision of landing on the moon. So today we have a bold vision, NASA's new charge to the moon. That was then. Today, our vice president and our president have set a charge to land the first American woman and the next American man at the south pole of the moon by 2024, followed by a sustained presence on and around the moon by 2028. And we will use all means necessary to ensure the mission's success. That's our vision today and our charge to the moon from our leadership. Can we do it though? That's a big question on a lot of people's minds. Here's an image of our administrator, Jim Bridenstine, in front of the Apollo lunar transport vehicle. That's the pressure vessel. That's the inside of the Apollo, and inside of that pressure vessel would be the crew. Outside would be still the skin to be put on it. And we're talking today about our deep space exploration plans being sustainable, reusable, extensible, lean and agile. So we're going to do it differently this time. We're going to be sustainable and reusable. We're going to try to reuse parts. We're going to be able to extend and be agile. We're going to be doing this in a less expensive way and in a way that leverages many partnerships. That's different from the way we did it in Apollo. And I thought it'd be interesting. I just threw this image in. Yesterday, there was a press release from NASA about the Orion today, and I wanted to give you a picture of what does Orion look like now. That's the same pressure vessel there on the right, the exact same hardware, only now it has the skin on the outside, has the docking system attached to the top, and the top pieces, the hatchways, and below is the service module, the rocket and the avionics and the navigation system that will take the crew capsule, could take it around the moon. This capsule has completed its final assembly and testing at Kennedy Space Center. Now it's going to move to the Plumbrook Station Space Power Facility for a thermal vacuum test. This is really one of the last things you do before you take yourself to the launch pad. They're going to put the whole thing in a very large vacuum chamber and run it down to the low temperatures that it'll see in space and the vacuum conditions, and they'll run all the systems to make sure that they work. So that's where Orion is today, and this capsule will actually launch next year on an unmanned mission around the moon to test and evaluate all the systems. So we are really going to do this. How are we going to do this? The Space Launch System is a major component of it, which I talked about a little bit. The Orion there, here's a mock-up of a streamlined external shell of the Orion. So there's the Orion. We'll do it with the crew capsule, the Orion crew capsule, and we'll do it with the Gateway. The Gateway is an orbiting platform around the moon where the crew capsule will arrive, and the landing systems will be for the landing on the moon, and the crew will use this as a command center around the moon and a way to station themselves to get to and from the surface. The Gateway will be in what's called a near rectilinear halo orbit around the moon, coming as close to about 5,000 kilometers from the moon's surface, and then in an elliptical orbit, it will be going out to about 30,000 kilometers out away from the moon. So it's a little bit different than the way the Apollo program worked, but this orbit allows us also to stage future missions beyond the moon. We'll be using the resources on the moon, looking at the lunar south pole. Here's the blue is water ice areas. These are permanently shadowed craters on the southern pole, and there are also some on the northern pole where we found that there's a good amount of water ice to be had. That could be a resource for oxygen, for fuel, for crew in the future missions. And we'll use the Artemis mission. The Artemis mission is the landing mission with the crew, landing capsule, the landing system, and then the return system to get the crew back up to the Gateway. We'll be using that and developing that. And then here's the surface systems missions. So we will be doing something a little bit differently this time, involving robotic exploration and human exploration together in a concert, in a teamwork sort of a way, starting with robotic exploration missions and then expanding up to human missions where the humans are working closely with the robotic systems to explore more of the moon's surface faster, easier, and in a more economic way. So we are going. Here we are. This is the moon. This is our target. This is our goal. Why should we go back? There are a number of reasons why NASA has stated that we should go back to the moon. The first, establish American leadership and strategic presence. And I know I'm speaking to an international audience, and this is a very American-centric goal. Okay, that I think we did it this way before, and it's fair for the United States to have an American leadership goal in space. I think that's reasonable. Proves technologies and capabilities for sending humans to Mars. Well, that's something we can all understand and work towards together, partners and commercial and the government. Something that's a little more broad, but it's still really about NASA doing NASA things for doing more NASA things beyond. Going to Mars is also an exploration goal for NASA, but it's important for NASA to set itself on a path that goes from the moon to something else. I do think that's important. Inspires a new generation and encourages careers in STEM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. That, I think, is a very worthy goal that brings back the knowledge and experience gained from going to the moon. It brings it back down to Earth and advances everyone here. We all rise together by having a better, more educated workforce and driving new science and technology into our world. That's the next one, advancing civilization changing science and technology. There's no doubt that the Apollo program and the shuttle program, ISS, and all of our space exploration experiences collectively around the world are advancing great science and technology changing methodologies. Really the miniaturization, the automation of technology that we need to do for space flight have found their way into almost every product that we use today. Things like our cell phones have science and technology miniaturization and automation and hardening for the harsh environments that we put our cell phones through. Those things are there, and we use them every day. We just don't realize that they were born out of a space exploration type of mission. Expand the U.S. global and economic impact. Of course, as we invest more in space exploration, we're investing in high technology jobs and careers here and around the world, as well as we all strive to put humans on the lunar surface and go beyond. We broaden the U.S. industry and international partnerships in deep space. I think that's important. There's no better example of international partnership and how that can achieve a goal that's greater than any one nation could do than the International Space Station. The International Space Station has been such an icon and an important international partnership for many nations and for our world. I think that it's a very important and worthy goal for us to have international partnerships be a part of our return to the moon. Okay, so why now? Why should we go back to the moon today versus, a while ago or tomorrow? Well, the ISS is really one of the most important reasons we should be going back now. The era of ISS is coming to a close. This huge orbiting platform that's larger than a 6-story house keeps at least 6 crew happy, and they've been people living there continuously over the last 20 years. The solar panels and the width of it are larger than the area of a football field. We have over a dozen missions launched from Russia, launched from the United States, and several places that are ferrying cargo and supplies, and crew from the Russian side that are there. The Russian vehicles are taking crew to and from several times a year. The space station is amazing. It's huge, amazing. It's an unprecedented platform for doing science and technology work and for proving out the technologies that we'll need on longer, deeper space missions. But it is coming to a close. The decommissioning was originally scheduled for 2024, 2028, 2030. There people talk about extending the mission, but it will eventually end. And so we will no longer have that resource. Furthermore, private and commercial space investments have exploded into a new marketplace. These new upstarts, as well as the old guard, the Blue Origin, SpaceX, Bigelow Aerospace, Sierra Nevada, Virgin Galactic. If you've not heard about these companies, Google them. They are doing amazing things on their own dime, their own industry dime, to develop new space exploration systems for human exploration. Boeing and Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, these are the traditional US aerospace companies. They're also getting into the game, investing their own dollars to advance capabilities to make a commercial market possible for exploration, at least in the low Earth orbit zone. The commercial providers are poised to make low Earth orbit accessible, affordable, and reasonably safe for mass market. You've got things like the SpaceX Dragon capsule on the left, Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser in the middle top, the Boeing Starliner on the right, and down below the Virgin Galactic Spaceship One and the White Knight, and I think that's the White Knight, the vehicle that takes it up to the high altitude. These are commercial endeavors, some supported by NASA for NASA missions to return humans to space and to have humans going to and from the International Space Station, but largely investments from private sector are putting these space exploration systems together. It's amazing to see this when just not too long ago it was really the domain of the government, and government investments were all we really had to put people into space. So that's great for low Earth orbit, but beyond low Earth orbit, GEO, which is geosynchronous orbit, beyond that zone remains the exclusive domain of a government investment and exploration program. The government's role is really to open up new markets for the private sector to expand into and to invest in and to compete for providing services. Low Earth orbit is really in a place where we're about there. We have almost got these commercial providers able to do it for themselves. But beyond that, when we go into deep space, that's still a domain where there isn't a proven out economic benefit for a commercial company to go to the moon. We still have to pave the way as a government and as a partnership of governments to find out what resources are there and to develop the technologies and capabilities to get there and get back safely, so that we can open that market eventually for human exploration. So Gateway enables exploration and Artemis enables lunar surface sorties. That's how NASA's set up its programs. So the charge for Gateway is to establish an orbiting platform around the moon as a gateway to the lunar surface and to destinations beyond. Charge of Artemis, land the first woman and the next man by 2024. It has 2 phases. They work together. The first phase is to do the human surface landing in 2024, and that involves a small phase 1 of the Gateway where the different components, the Orion comes together, the lunar landing system comes together with Gateway. The crew do work there. They use it as a command post. They go from the Orion to the lunar landing system down to the surface and back, and then they take the Orion to get home. Artemis phase 2 is establishing a longer term presence. Here's a graphic of the phase 1 that takes us to the lunar surface by 2024. On the top, you've got the archway of the Orion missions, the buildup of a small gateway, arrival of the Artemis lunar landing system on the last 2 missions there. And then meanwhile, on the lunar surface, we have small commercial lunar payload services. Lunar systems are landing, they're doing science. We're building up then in the middle to larger cargo landers, and then finally to the human lander to get people there. What kind of lunar science are we thinking of doing by 2024? We'll have polar landers and rovers, which we have not had before, to really directly measure the polar volatiles, the water, and see what else is there. Really understand the vertical and lateral distribution. We're really trying to understand, and these things that looked like dead rocks in the past, the moon, what's really there, and can we use it to help us live or survive or go beyond? Non-polar landers and rovers will also be a part of the exploration plan. We'll look at scientifically valuable terrains that were not investigated by Apollo. Apollo only landed on the moon 6 times, and there are 6 small sites around the equator of the moon that have been explored, but that's it. We really haven't done a whole lot of looking around the rest of the moon yet. We'll also use PI-led instruments, science-led instruments to do discovery class science, like establishing a geophysical network and visiting a lunar volcanic region to understand how the volcanic evolution occurred on the moon and how it may have died out. There'll be orbital data that we'll collect, high resolution imagery of the entire surface of the moon. And then finally, on the right there, in situ resource utilization. We'll start to really answer the question of whether or not what is there, the water, for example, can be turned into water for drinking, the oxygen can be extracted to be air for breathing, and the water and the hydrogen and oxygen of the water can be actually turned into rocket fuel to get us back or to get us onto Mars or other destinations. This in situ resource utilization is a very important science and technology advancement area, and this is our first chance to really prove it out in a real setting. Gateway Phase 2 for 2024 and beyond really starts to build up a much more international presence. Here's an earlier depiction from last year of all the international partners that have already signed up. There are several ESA partners, JAXA partner, Canadian Space Agency has a robotic arm. The Russian Federation has a module that they're working on, bringing up an airlock and a utilization capability. There are other international partners that are talking about becoming involved, and I think that this is the Gateway is going to become an international collaboration. It's not going to be as big as the space station by any means. It's still going to be small by comparison, but it's going to really be a platform for science and technology, and then eventually a platform for going beyond. So where beyond? You know, moon before Mars is our statement here at NASA lately. On the moon, we can take the reasonable risks. While astronauts are just 3 days away from the home, they can get home in a fairly quick fashion if something were to go wrong. We'll prove out the technologies, mature systems necessary to live and work on another world before embarking on the much longer 2 to 3 year mission that could be a Mars orbital mission or a Mars lander mission. And the Gateway is in a good position to be able to support both kinds of missions, a lunar landing mission and a transit mission onto Mars. So what's Kennedy Space Center's role in all of this? As I mentioned, the launching capability and the payload processing. We do a lot of the payload processing type work. All those modules for the Gateway will come here. They'll get outfitted. They'll get put on rockets. Of course, we do launching from the multi-user spaceport. Many of the pads we have here are now being leased to commercial companies like SpaceX, for example, and Blue Origin. They're going to be launching their own rockets, some with NASA missions and some with private space exploration missions. We have commercial Gateway logistics missions. This is a new leadership role, and one that I'm very involved in is the cargo supply missions to the Gateway that will support the Gateway and support the lunar missions. Kennedy Space Center is leading that effort. And then we do a lot of new technology capability using a commercial approach here at Kennedy Space Center. We do plant science, we do robotic technology for mining the moon. We do other types of technologies that relate to handling and managing cryogenic liquids like liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and handling and managing the dust and other environmental contaminants that we get here at Kennedy Space Center, but perhaps we would also get at a space base on the lunar surface. So anything that has to do with a space base and launching and landing and all the work that goes into getting that rocket to go, that's what Kennedy Space Center focuses on, and we'll be focusing on that on the moon as well as here on Earth. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about the deep space logistics missions. This is the spacecraft that will bring supplies and cargo, and we like to compare it to a semi-truck. You can do a lot of different things with a logistics mission. You can have a cargo carrier, all the little, the packaging and supplies. You can bring spacesuits. You can bring needed supplies for the lunar surface, food, water, air. All of that's got to be carried to the gateway and to the lunar surface. The logistics missions can support that. They can bring elements. And what we mean by elements are other big pieces. A logistics mission could deliver part of the lunar lander as a piece of the puzzle or a piece of the architecture to get to the lunar surface. And fuel is another thing. We could bring a refueler. Some of that lunar surface systems, the transportation to and from the moon's surface, all of that needs to be refueled for every mission. We're not going to just throw it away like we did with Apollo. All of this architecture, the most that we can possibly make reusable will be reusable. So we need to refuel those systems, get the fuel up there and do refueling in space, which is not something we've done before. It's a new thing. So all of that is cargo and payloads, and that's what Kennedy Space Center and our project with the logistics mission will be supporting. Okay, so can we really do it? We're wrapping up here. Things are different now, and I think much better for NASA and for all of us to be able to return to the moon. Different from the 1960s, today we're going together. Instead of a space race, we have a broad international cooperation. We're sharing the cost. We're not going to have that huge, monstrous cost that we had in the 60s. Instead of that monumental investment, we're going to have a rapidly growing private sector, which we have already, that's involved in its own commercial investments. We'll be able to leverage that. We were 4% of the budget back in the 60s with Apollo. We're 0.5% of the budget. Total NASA budget is the federal budget, and NASA's budget to return the moon is even smaller. It's 0.1% of the federal budget today, and it's not expected to change. We're going to be able to go back with that kind of a mission cost because of all the other things we're doing. We're sharing the risk and reward. Instead of NASA developed and NASA owned systems where the government is really leading and owning everything, we've got a commercial space system that we can leverage for services. The picture there is the Gateway Max-R PPE, which is the power and propulsion element. That's the first element that will go up for the Gateway. It's commercial, and it's going to be very, very interesting. It'll be done by the commercial sector. They will fly it up there, they'll run it, and then NASA will take ownership of it after it's been there for a year in space. And so all we have to do is operate it. And we're going sustainably. Commercial partnerships, scalable and reusable mission components that I mentioned, and reasonable budget establish this long-term sustainable commitment. Back in the 60s, after the Apollo landings, and we were spending so much money on the moon, once we got there, the American public did not continue to be enthusiastic about spending that kind of money on going to the moon. We won the space race, we landed on the moon. The concept waned. People were not as excited about it, and eventually that's why the Apollo missions only lasted through 6 or 7 missions. So this time we've got to do it differently. We've got to keep the budget tight, work with others, international and domestic, to share the risk and reward and do this in a sustainable fashion that everyone can get on board with and hold on to. So I think the time is right. Let's go. Let's do this. We have the capability, we have the charge, we have the purpose, and we have the responsibility. So that's what I think. I'm curious to know what you all think. So I think I'd like to go to our next poll, and then I will hand over control.
All right, I just launched the poll. Let's wait for people to vote in it. Just a few seconds. Okay, we're collecting the first votes. it's spiked toward a yes, which
Oh,
I
good.
think you like. It's actually 100% yes so far.
Oh,
We'll give it 10 more seconds. Oh, we have a no.
good. Oh, I want to hear from that person.
But we have another no. But we have an 86%, which is 83%, sorry, which is quite overwhelming of yeses. And almost everyone voted. So 85% yeses and 15% no's. And I think I can share the results with you.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Jeff, for your amazing talk. And we have several questions. So unfortunately, I would need to select some of them, but we have a couple about oxygen, actually.
Okay.
And so one of them is from Kevin, and he's asking, would you use plants to generate oxygen in long-term missions?
Yes, plants can be used to generate oxygen for long-term missions, although if you look at how many plants you need to generate oxygen for one crew member for one day, it gets to be a lot of area that you need to be growing the plants over. So for the early missions, the missions in phase 1, plants will not be used for that kind of thing. But as we move into a more sustainable presence on the lunar surface, I expect to see larger areas dedicated to plant growth for generating oxygen, for supplementing the food that the astronauts will be eating, using fresh food to supplement their diet of stored food or dried food. And then also plants are really great for cleaning the air and water. They're wonderful at decontaminating water, for example, and filtering it. So those would be the main 3 things we would use plants for.
Okay, fantastic. The second question about oxygen is this one by Marco. Great name, by the way. Is an Earth-like atmosphere possible on the moon, and how would you achieve that?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Is an Earth-like atmosphere possible on the moon, and how would you create that?
Well, okay, the answer, maybe the easy answer for is an Earth-like atmosphere possible on the moon is no. The moon is small. It has only 1/6 the gravity of the Earth. And so generally people believe that even if we were to release enough gas into the lunar, on the lunar surface to make an atmosphere, it would easily escape the gravity of the moon and just kind of float out into space and be gone. But if you want to be innovative, I think the answer could be yes. Maybe not the way you think. Of course, if we were to create domes and fill the domes with atmosphere, that's a way to do it. You could cover large areas of the moon with an atmosphere if you built a dome of some kind, or maybe even more likely in the near future is if we find caves and cave structures, lava tubes under the lunar surface, which is thought to be very possible. Those lava tubes will pretty much be a sealed environment, and we could pressurize the lava tubes with atmosphere, and it would have a very slow leak rate. So it might be a way that we could have very large areas under the lunar surface with a pressurized Earth-like atmosphere that would be good spaces for people to be able to live and work.
All right, we have one from Nerea. Is there any plan to include biological or clinical research in this Back to the Moon project, apart from the technological and geological research?
So biological and clinical research, yes, very much so. Every crew member, every astronaut and cosmonaut that goes into space now is a volunteer for probably a dozen or more life sciences, clinical or human research experiments. There are a lot of studies. They are, as I said, there are only so many people who've been in space at this point. So every crew member is very carefully watched and studied, and they are volunteers in these studies, just like any volunteer would have to volunteer on Earth to be part of a clinical study. The crew members also volunteer, but they're very, very interested in advancing and opening the way for everyone and sharing what we learn. That said, though, the way we think of clinical research today here on Earth, we are usually talking about hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of people being involved in the clinical studies. Whereas in space, you're talking about 2 people going to the lunar surface, or maybe 4 on a total Artemis mission, and the duration is very short. So we really are not getting the long-term space exposures and the large number of people you would really need for clinical research, but we are certainly doing a lot of human research and human health and physiology research on every single mission to the space station, and then certainly for Artemis and beyond. And then you asked about geophysical research. Absolutely, I think that is all the instruments and capabilities that we are going to bring on the robotic missions to the moon, and then the human missions. There will be a lot of geophysical research to understand the moon, understand how it evolved, how it is today, and how that participates in a larger understanding of the solar system and beyond.
All right, so we have a couple of linked questions about the decommissioning of the International Space Station. Jordana and myself are asking, how will this happen? Will it be orbited back to Earth? How will this happen?
Wow, yeah, good question. I think that one direction that NASA has been trying to encourage, and there is some progress here, is that the space station would become commercial. So if right now it is a international partnership, a consortium of governments manage it and operate it and have a say in what happens to it. So it's not just the United States, but it might be there might be a way to give it up or hand it over to a commercial entity who would then operate it as a commercial space station. So that's a possibility. It might be that some parts of the space station are taken apart and they become smaller space stations. Right now, the portion of the space station that's Russian space station is actually an independent operating capability on its own. It could be taken apart, and that part of the space station could go and be its own thing, and then the rest could be decommissioned or be used for commercial or something. So you might see taking it apart and moving pieces to other places. But finally, all of those modules will have their end of life, and they will have to come down at some point. And so to do that, the most likely scenario is that the space station it'll either be taken apart and individual parts will be brought down separately in a controlled fashion, or the international group will decide to bring it all down as one big piece in a very controlled and careful way, so that we can pinpoint the landing point somewhere that it's very far away from any humans, and we'll be able to control it in that fashion. So those are the 3 or 4 main scenarios I think that are being discussed. I don't know which one will happen, but eventually everything does have to come down at some point. I suppose maybe you could boost it up to the moon. That would be another very very expensive proposition, but not impossible to increase the orbit and get it out far enough so that it will stay out for a long time.
All right, thank you. A couple more about career advice. So as a student studying for a bachelor degree in biotechnology, what is my possible prospective job in space traveling? And this is from Diego. And
in space traveling, or in working for a space agency, or as a part of a space exploration? I'll answer the 2 questions there. One is, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be, for whatever technical or even non-technical area that you're interested in, there's never been a better time to be excited about space exploration and to get a career in an area that is involved with space exploration. All the commercial industries that are coming along that employ people from biology to physics to aerospace engineering, but they have business development offices, legal offices, human resources offices, everything. Business is just as important to those commercial companies as the technology. So they're employing people all across the spectrum of educated degree holding new technology and enthusiastic, energetic people. So whatever you're doing, if you want to get involved in the space industry, don't just think about government space industry, think about private sector space industry too. Most of those private sector industries have contracts with the government, with NASA or with ESA or JAXA. So you don't think of it as just I have to work for the government. You could work for anybody who's doing space exploration work. There's a lot of opportunity out there right now, especially in the biotech and biology areas. And that's an area I know well. For going into space, well, like I said, there's not too many people who are getting to do that. But I think the best thing you can do if you want to go professionally into space would be work very hard at whatever it is you've got to do. Be absolutely the best you can at it. Strive for excellence, and whatever it is you get to do it the best that anybody has ever done it that you know of before. And that's how you rise to the level of becoming an astronaut or a cosmonaut or even a space explorer. However, I think there will be some room for commercial space exploration and commercial astronauts, and for people who may want to pay for a ride into space. That's not too far away. For that kind of an adventure, I think we probably have to wait. Most of us probably have to wait a little bit until the price comes down enough for us to afford. But some people like Virgin Galactic, Burt Rutan, who runs Virgin Galactic, says he wants the price of a ticket to ride in space to get down to the level where anybody could do it for a vacation. So there are people out there working on getting us all to space as soon as they can.
Okay, we have a couple linked questions by Michael and Omar. So the questions are, how long will the missions in the moon expected to last for each phase? Isn't there a bigger risk from radiation compared to lower orbit? And how might that be addressed? How's the technology status of radiation and cosmic ray protection?
Right. So there are definitely differences between low Earth orbit radiation and deep space radiation. We get a little bit of help in low Earth orbit from the Van Allen belts, which direct a lot of the sun's solar particles away from towards the poles and away from the equatorial regions, which is where the space station runs. So we get some protection from deep space radiation here in low Earth orbit that we don't get beyond low Earth orbit. So we do have a more harsh radiation environment. How will the crew handle that in the first missions that are only going to be between 2 weeks and 4 weeks long, 15 to 30 days? That's not too long. They can handle the radiation exposure. It's not damaging in any way that we know is permanent, so they're able to be exposed for that long. If we want to go out for longer periods, 2 and 3 months are the longer durations that we're anticipating for lunar missions right now. 2 and 3 month missions, we will want to do more to shield the astronauts and the crew from the deep space radiation. There will be larger shielding efforts. There may be regolith on the surface that we build up into walls or use to cover habitats to make a more shielded zone for the crew to sleep in, for example, to reduce the radiation exposure they would be experiencing. Those are things that we're going to really have to be concerned about on a trip to Mars. Although a trip to Mars for 2 or 3 years, a human can survive that in deep space. The radiation environment is not so harsh that it's survivable, but the problem is you would be exposed to more radiation in that 2 or 3 years than is acceptable and considered to be safe for a person to then come home and live a happy, healthy life for the rest of your life. It's too much radiation for that. So we have to find better ways to shield our crew to make sure that they don't get exposed to too much radiation.
Okay, unfortunately, we have no time for further questions. All the other questions that I received will be sent to Jeff, which will do his best to answer them. And I really want to thank you, Jeff, for being here today, because it was, I feel like it was a really, really interesting and educational webinar for all of us. And I thank all the attendees. I just have a few final remarks to deliver, and then we will be closing this webinar. Thank you again, Jeff.
Thank you. Oh, it's my pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want to remind you that later today we will have another ECTS only webinar by Dennis Disher about mechanotransaction of ECM cell interactions. And on the 17th of December, we will have another one by Gabri van der Pluim and Pema Nagy about bone and cancer. And please do not forget that the abstract submission is open for the ECTS Congress in Marseille. So you can send your abstract today if you wanted to. So again, thanks to everyone who attended today. I think it was a very nice webinar, and I'll see you in the next one.